Ukraine's elite units seem to be the only ones pushing back against Russian aggression. But is it enough, or is it actually all part of the plan? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so there's a couple of stories here that have recently hit the wires, one of which is that Ukrainian special forces are seizing new ground near Kharkiv. And this sounds like actually a effort by the Ukrainian forces to counterattack a Russian effort to sort of restart their Kharkiv offensive, which itself is kind of newsworthy. This is the objective of the Russian forces to capture the town of Leipzig. And to achieve this, of course, they opened a new, what they say is assault vector, likely a new axis of advance is what we would call it in sort of NATO or English-speaking parlance. But new advance follows the E105 highway. When we take a look at the maps here, we can zoom out and zoom back in, right? So you can see here, I think this is probably your E105 highway. And again, you can see kind of their efforts to take the town of Leipzig here. And I think what this is actually, so we saw the fact that the Ukrainians sort of bloodied the nose of a Russian regiment that got caught out in this forested area, cutting them off and then eliminating them. Likely the Russians were probably not exactly thrilled about this. And the Russian military always seems to love throwing good troops after bad, right? Why just make one mistake when you can double and triple down on it? So you've got Leipzig, and then you've got what looks like Russian forces probably trying to advance along this roadway. And as we've talked about on this channel, due to the level of mining and just sort of the ease of hitting troops in the open, there's just been this tactical norm where Russian troops just drive down a roadway and get pieced apart by drones. But the opposite is also kind of a problem. It means that if Ukrainians want to retake territory, they need to push in the other direction of this roadway. And so I think what you have here is the Ukrainian Special Forces. One, there is a strategic reason to keep the Russians out of Kharkiv, right? So here is Kharkiv, and you can see here the front line is about 30 kilometers away. And this is a problem because, again, that's from Kharkiv city center. If you were to look at the outskirts of Kharkiv, again, pulling it back a little bit, you can see that actually the Russian forces are pretty close to being able to put artillery rounds into Kharkiv proper. And I think the Ukrainians are really trying to avoid that. I think Kharkiv is a city, again, like Kiev, where they're really prioritizing the defense of the city, keeping the Russians at bay as much as possible. And not just because I think Russian ground troops will be able to break through, but I think the actual fear is that Russian artillery, once it reaches a certain level, is close enough, it would be able to start doing what Russians do everywhere, which is leveling cities. And I think actually the Russians kind of want to do that, almost to punish the Ukrainians, something that actually has been a pretty tactical staple of theirs. And so the Ukrainians have likely said, listen, we need to contain this breach where it is. We can't let the Russians pivot to the strategy that has been effective for them in the East of these gradual creeping advances. So when Russian forces did try to make these advances, the Ukrainians likely just seemed to counterattack. Right? Regaining the positions and sort of taking momentum in their favor, right? And you can see that this effort just has not really paid off for them. Again, you're looking at it may actually be this. This may actually be the highway. I'm not 100% certain, but still, this is just, I think, an indicator that Ukrainians can counterattack. They just need to set their priorities, and their priorities right now are limited, right? We're going to talk, there's one other place where we're seeing the Ukrainians follow the same set of tactics, but before we talk about that, if you're interested in seeing some uncensored combat footage and some deep dive analysis, I'm actually working through the documentary by the International Legion during their Operation Shovel, and if you want to see that, that breakdown is available for members on combatvetnews.com. And most important, though, is the fact that combatvetnews.com is the way to support me. I have basically no sponsors on this channel, except for you guys who sponsor me. So if you want to, again, help me out, keep me independent, and keep me able to cover the news as extensively as I am, I depend on you guys. So pop over to combatvetnews.com. Specialist tier will get you access to those videos, but if you want the Q&As or the shout-outs, you can get those additional tiers. So thanks a lot to all the members of combatvetnews.com. Okay, so let's talk about the other spot where I think Ukraine is basically running through the same playbook. Ukrainian forces reportedly clearing out the village of Kruhilivka in Kharkiv Oblast, right? Clearing them of Russian soldiers. This was, again, a special forces unit supported by the Ukrainian 77th. And they said as a result of this operation, the enemy was driven out of the settlement and the occupiers' routes of movement were mined. This is really critical. And you can see here, it's near Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast. And I'll show you why I think this was also something where the Ukrainians looked and said, listen, this is actually a strategic priority. And the answer is, you can see here why, right? This represents the Senkova bridge over the, now it looks like the bridge has been destroyed, but Kruhilivka is a crucial point. And if the Russians can actually cut this off, they're going to seize two key facets, right? They're going to actually potentially try to probably cut off this Kupiansk region. So you can see there's limited ways past the Oskil here. And they're trying to put pressure in the north to try to create this northern block. And then if they can effectively push into the south, particularly cut off this key highway around the other side in Senkova, there's going to be a huge problem for Ukrainian troops looking to hold this whole region here. And remember, you can cut off a place like Senkova without necessarily being there. If Russians can control the entire village up to the bank of the Oskil, they can just move forward artillery, mortars, and FPV drones and ensure that nobody can transit through this point. So for Ukrainian forces, they likely looked at this situation and said, listen, we can't allow Russia to complete this blocking attack. And so they employed, again, their special forces in this limited capacity to say, listen, push them out of Kruhilivka, mine these areas here so that they can't further advance, so that we can stabilize this situation. Again, this isn't to say the Ukrainians are pivoting tactics, but their remaining priorities are very clear, which is limited tactical attacks in critically essential terrain. The remainder and the majority of the lines, the policy is simple. Let the Russians be the one to assume the risk, inflict maximum casualties, and really just punish the Russian war machine. That seems to be the core strategy, and it's something that the Ukrainians are continuing to do. Anyway, guys, that's really all I had. A huge thank you to all the Colonel tier members like Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. See you over there. Cheers.